Okay,
Hello,
sorry.
this is working, I think.
Yeah, this is working.
All right, okay, let's get into it. Uh, well, this is a podcast. If you guys didn't realize from probably the title, I don't know, I can't see into the future. But yeah, we talk about the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So, Sam, go away and tell us about your experience of this series franchise.
All right, so I've read the books a few times. Three times, I think now I've read the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I've read The Hobbit a few times too. And I've also read the Silmarillion, which is a sort of, I guess, a precursor, a sort of the history of the
Like the
world.
Bible-ish.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
tells a creation story and the sort of overall history. And then I've
yeah.
read the Children of Hurin as well. Is the other sort of major text I've read. So I'm not an expert, but I've read most of the literary world surrounding it. So I've got a
Yeah.
reasonable knowledge.
I haven't read The Hobbit. I haven't read Lord of the Rings. I've got the Silmarillion on my shelf, like literally right there. I can see it right there, to my right. Um, Very old copy of the Silmarillion, actually. I've read parts of it. I read like the Genesis section of it, and one day I'm going to get through all of it. But it is crazy with all the names that are in it.
Yeah,
I do know of the lore though. I've seen Civilization X's lore videos, and then in terms of the movies, um, this is on my channel, and you might be able to tell from my previous video on the cinematic experience. I'm kind of a film person, right? And I love me my blockbusters. I love my Star Wars and my Marvel, my big action movies. And during lockdown, I decided to watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy, one each weekend, and they blew me away. And I realized that I do not remember seeing them before, like at all. And I kind of feel ashamed because they're like the blockbusters. Um, and so that's kind of segueing into the topic that we're going to try and explore, which has a very obvious answer in our opinion, which is it is the Lord of the Rings trilogy the best film trilogy in film history? Obviously, yeah, in film. Is it the best film trilogy? Do you want to just give your answer now and we can try and justify it? Because I'm going to
uh,
say yes.
yeah. I'd say it's probably the best. I wouldn't say it's my favorite. I think
Is
Star
that the
Wars.
OT for you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just sort of either because I'm nostalgic or because it's sort of it's got that
They have the magic, don't they? There's
yeah.
just, I mean, so does Lord of the Rings. I mean, they literally have magic, but there's a sort of a charm to them in the movie's flaws.
There's
Like
something
I in
extra.
Return of the Jedi, you know this. I do not really like the first half of Return of the Jedi. It kind of sucks, but you can love it for that. You can really love it for the stupid stuff that goes on.
See, I actually don't mind. I don't mind the first half of Return of the Jedi, but that I'm sort of
Yeah, like it's all right, and I mean it was just dumb fun, and it's just cool for that, and there's just a grittiness. Like for example, the CG in those movies is impressive for the time, but doesn't really hold up. But I think that them not holding up is kind of part of the charm.
mm,
Anyways, let's get into the next bit. We talk about Star Wars now. We'll do a Star Wars podcast later. I'm sure we can do fun one. We can do a Jill the Fates read through or something like that. That'd be
yeah,
cool.
that'd be interesting.
Anyways, so this is going to be a very Sam centric bit. The the differences between the books and the films. I've not read the book, so this is Sam's bit. Take away.
All right, so um, the books are better than the films. I'll say that as a precursor. Uh,
It's hard to compare books and films, but I get what you mean. Yeah,
no, it's sort of it. They don't make the films aren't as good in comparison, but the films are as good as they can be. I think because the majority of these changes make sense in terms of making a film, which I'm sure Jay will be able to comment on. So the first change,
yeah,
I think, is with pacing. So there are a few things in the books that are in different places than in the films. Um, for example, the part with Shelob, right, where Sam and Frodo fight her. In the books, that takes place at the end of Two Towers,
Oh
and
right.
you see Frodo get taken away. but you don't actually know his fate. So it ends on a major cliffhanger. But in the
Because
film,
the movie does kind of do that, with Gollum saying, like, we'll take him to her, and you have
yeah,
no idea who her is. Um, but I guess they kind of wanted to move that to the third movie to give Frodo and Sam more to do in Return of the King,
yeah, exactly.
which does mean that in the Two Towers, like, they do take the backseat, which is fine, like absolutely fine, because everything else is also super interesting. But yeah,
And that's something that, again, like the books are their own separate thing, so the pacing in that works fine. But for a movie, it works a lot better this way, and that's
mm.
definitely a positive change in terms of adapting it. Um, uh, and speaking of sort of Frodo and Sam, Faramir, he is completely different in the film from the books, and I think it kind of works and it kind of doesn't. I prefer his character in the books, but in the films, he provides a necessary plot point for Frodo and Sam in Two Towers. Otherwise, they literally wouldn't have anything to do.
Because I heard that in the books he doesn't get tempted by the ring,
Yeah, he completely.
and so yeah,
Yeah, he's like the
but they
anti
had to do
Boromir,
that
which
in the
is
movies
important.
because there's conflict by him being tempted by the ring,
Mm,
and while he's less like cool as a character, it does support the idea of temptation of man and things like that. So I do prefer the movie's interpretation of it.
See, that's interesting because I think Boromir kind of already serves that purpose, and I
Mm.
think Faramir is an interesting. The reason they have Faramir as well as Aragorn both denying the ring is because I think Faramir is just like a normal guy, and it shows that like bloodline or anything has nothing to do with it. Otherwise, Boromir
Yeah.
wouldn't have been tempted. So I get why Faramir is like that in the books, and I think it works for the books, but I don't think Faramir in the books would work in the films, which is another reason that it's a sort of
And also in the film, he's like insecure as hell, and that leads him to what's nearly his death.
oh yeah,
Um, so I'm guessing in the books is like not like that, not like that at all.
Denethor in the books is definitely that's one of the major things I do prefer, because he does still go crazy, but he doesn't go as crazy as he does in the films.
Yeah, I was actually kind of confused by that. Like these movies convey all their fantasy and their lore like spectacularly, but I had no idea what was going on with Denethor. I think in a deleted scene for the extended cut, I think he looks into one of the Palantir,
Mm.
the Seeing Stones, and but I think they cut that out for the theatrical version, which are still like
Yeah,
3.5
so
hours long each.
in the books, that is how he goes crazy by basically Sauron shows him the destruction of Gondor and how it's inevitable. Um, but in the films, I don't really know why they would cut that scene. Um, I mean, apparently, I haven't seen the extended editions, but from what I hear,
Me neither.
they are superior. And I think
Yeah.
if I were making a film, that's one scene I wouldn't leave out of the theatrical release.
Yeah, well, when it comes to things like this, I mean, like, there are lots of kind of extended cuts. You know, the infamous one is the Ultimate Edition of Batman and Superman. And the whole point is that the extended cut is the director's cut. It's like when you have a movie, there's tons of footage, and then there's usually a director's cut, which is usually the length of the film that would get released because there isn't that much plot um, to warrant 4.5 hours. But for these movies, there was just so much stuff that the extended versions were 4.5 hours, 5 hours long each. And they're like, you can't release that in cinemas. As soon as you go above 3 hours, the willingness of people to watch a movie like plummets incredibly. So Endgame
Mm.
was 3 hours 1 minute, cause which I didn't like that they cut a lot out of the end, but they did that because there's kind of like a peak, and as soon as you go past 3 hours, it plummets. And so you can't have a 4.5 hour long film in the cinema, and also it just wouldn't work practically. But 3.5 hours is still like incredible
Mm.
for a movie.
I mean, I think it's impressive that it manages to stay afloat for that long.
Yep.
You never get
It
bored.
doesn't feel bloated like the Hobbit trilogy, because they're adapting like an equal, or they're adapting so much book that even the extended cuts probably cut stuff out,
Oh yeah.
or even just what they didn't even shoot everything. I mean, there's stuff from not even from the books as well. Like you said, how or I found out how Sauron like invades like Ferandril, and all the like he invades like the Woodland Realm and different places, and um, Erebor, and that's not even in the books. That's in like Tolkien's notes or something.
Mm.
So there's just so much. I mean, it's literally an epic story, which is yeah,
That's why I think like the films you got to take them as what they are, which is just really impressive at managing to accomplish so
yep,
much.
yep. I mean, I think the movies had like 4 editors, like a 4-man editing team, which is quite impressive. A lot of movies only have one editor, but the editors and the director and Peter Jackson, who did an incredible job, and the screenwriters who helped him, had probably had very long conversations about what to shoot, what to
Mm.
completely leave out, what to cut out of the extended edition, and then what to cut out of the theatrical edition, which must have been tough because, for example, there's a confrontation between Gandalf and the Witch King, um, when just before Rohan arrives at Pelennor Fields. And to be honest, it's not the coolest scene, but it's a scene that you might have wanted to keep in. And it's a scene that they would have kept in if it wasn't for the fact that there's just so much I had to cut out.
Yeah, there's no way you can have everything, but I think
Yeah.
I mean they did the best with sort of how much they could put in, and I think they did succeed
Yeah.
impressively.
The only thing I don't love, I mean, one thing that actually better example that I have is that goes to show how much they had to be very frugal with their editing was that Saruman, who's like the secondary antagonist, if you want to count Gollum as a sort of a deuteragonist instead as an antagonist, but Saruman is like the second big bad, right? And they kill him, and his death scene is cut. You don't see him again in the theatrical edition after like some establishing shots of him building more Urukai. Like they don't even show him be killed in the theatrical cut. That's how much they had to be so conservative with their editing, which is just kind of film 101, editing 101. Nothing is sacred, and they definitely practiced that with these movies because they had to.
Yeah, I mean, as far as important scenes go, like that's pretty high up. But to show that they can
So
still cut out.
so is there more kind of differences you want to talk about before we get into the next topic?
Yeah, well, there's a few minor things, like the Ents in the books. They never really that they decided to go to war. They didn't have a sort of change of heart like the films do.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, there are a few
Wow.
moments of that in the films. That's one of the criticisms I have is that they have sort of unnecessary drama they've added that wasn't in the books for the for the cinematic audience, which kind of works,
Yeah.
but then also kind of cheapens it a bit. I think.
Because in movies you can't introduce like a bunch of characters who are important in a side plot and then they just go, no, we can't be asked to help out.
Yeah,
So I get why they did that. And also I guess there's this idea of nature in this story, and nature kind of prevailing. I guess they wanted to really show that with the Ents kind of destroying Isengard.
oh yeah, well, the end they do that in a book, but I mean they never in the films they sort of decide they're not going to go to war and then immediately change their minds.
Oh, okay, I see. So
Yeah,
yeah, so they probably did that for tension in the movies then. So they kind of keep that conflict in the air. Because with this is kind of a miscellaneous kind of bit. I can't really fit in a topic, but there's I think Hitchcock or Orson Welles, I can't remember, but they said it's good to have parallel storylines because you can build one up, and as soon as that not stops getting interesting, you just cut to the next one. And that builds up, you cut to the next one, and that's why I think the Two Towers while I think is by a minuscule amount the weakest of the movies, because it's not an introduction or an ending, it's certainly a fantastic movie, because it's got tons of different storylines that split and all that stuff, and it's constantly engaging. There's constant tension, constant drama, and like pacing, and it's all on point, to be honest. So yeah.
Mm. I think Fellowship's probably my favorite. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd say Fellowship is a very hell no, it's not basic, but it's the most straightforward.
Mm.
It's almost like it's very similar to, I guess, like the first two Hobbit films in one. Like it's a very sort of basic hero's journey sort of story. Two Towers is kind of like the empire of it, where it's just continuing the action. Return of the King has got a fantastic climax, although in the first half it's great, but I wouldn't say the first half of that movie is super special narratively. But yeah, the Fellowship, in terms of it, you begin with the prologue, and then you go to the Shire. It's a complete change of tone, and then there's this sort of slow kind of journey out of that into the darkness of the rest of Middle Earth, which I think makes it one of the best films ever. Yeah,
I'd almost compare it to like, after Fellowship, like after the Fellowship breaks, it almost becomes a completely different story. Kind of reminds me of
yeah.
Psycho.
Fellowship of the Ring doesn't isn't just the first part of the big story. I mean, of course it is, but it tells its own story of the forging and the destruction of this fellowship, which kind of coincides with Frodo's sort of emergence. He has to rely on Gandalf and Aragorn, Legolas, and all those people, and at the end, he just pisses off on his own. Of course, Sam helps him, and Sam comes along, but it's kind of his slow realization that he's got to do this kind of alone, and that he's got to be this kind of savior, well, not savior, but this person to do the deed, which is quite a thrilling, riveting story.
Yeah. Actually, my biggest criticism of the films is to do with Sam and Frodo. Um,
Go ahead.
Basically, the scene where Sam gets sent home by Frodo. That is
When,
completely, in
when's
Return of the
that?
King, when they're climbing the staircase.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Frodo's just like piss off
Yeah,
because it's getting manipulated.
that never happens in the books, which I think that's probably. I mean, I think they're Frodo and Sam are good up to that point, but I think that kind of ruins their relationship a bit in the film.
I think the point was is that their relationship was ruined. Like, because you have this like wholesome relationship, and suddenly Frodo's like, "I don't want you anymore," and it really shows like
Story of my
Jesus
life.
Christ, like Frodo might not drop the ring, and of course he doesn't, and it kind of is like because Frodo's journey doesn't end when he drops the ring. Like he's still scarred, literally, but he's kind of changed, and so it really ends. His repair, I guess, really ends when he goes to the Undying Lands, and you see him smile for the first time in like hours. Um, so I think the movies kind of went out of their way to show how far he was going because of Gollum and the ring. So I thought that was quite a good plot point.
I can see your argument, but at the same rate, I think like one of the themes of the series is like friendship, right? And I think the strength of their friendship. I mean, it still fails ultimately, I suppose, because
Well, it
Frodo's.
doesn't really fail. Well, Sam saves Frodo, so I guess that's the relationship repaired. It does fail. I think this happens in the book that Frodo like doesn't drop the ring.
Yeah,
That was in the book, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Um, and I think the whole point is that yeah, I guess friendship is important, but I think it seemed to me like the idea was that it was kind of permanently fractured. Um, and like just kind of as a consequence, as sort of a tragic consequence of this story. I think it's not completely sunshine and rainbows at the end. Of course, it isn't in the books either with the Scourging of the Shire.
Mm. Which I guess we could talk about now.
Yeah,
That
that
was
was
a
a hint.
nice segue. Yeah, so basically, Scourging of the Shire is where, I mean, this is somewhat the payoff because Saruman doesn't get killed off in the books until the end. Whereas, I mean, they only kill him off in the extended edition of the films, and that is right basically after the storming of Isengard. But in the books,
Yeah,
he escapes with Wormtongue to the Shire and basically does his best to get revenge by ruining everything. And basically, um, he incites mass industrialization,
yeah,
and there's loads of like there's no orcs or anything, but there are evil men, um, and they're taking over the Shire. They're sort of like the mafia with
right.
Saruman at its head. And at the end of Return of the King, all the hobbits go back to the Shire, and they have to deal with this mess basically.
Christ.
But the point is that they can deal with it on their own. They don't need Gandalf or Aragorn or anyone else to help
I
them.
see.
Um,
So they sort it out and stuff, but I'm guessing a lot of hobbits were killed.
yeah, so there's a proper battle,
Yikes. I
which
mean, imagine that in a movie. Imagine the audience like going, "Oh, the day is saved. Everyone's safe. Aragorn is king. Gondor is back to. Oh my god, this Shire. Even the Shire's gone screwed over now. It's
well,
like because
yeah, sorry, go on.
yeah, because I was just gonna say like how the Shire is kind of like so. There's that guy who they come who like he's always shaking his head at hobbits and at our hobbits and when they come back he's still shaking his head at them and it's like the Shire is so innocently ignorant of everything that's happened and
Yeah,
it's like imagine if these people have suddenly just got raided like that would have been dark. I don't know if I like that they didn't do that. I really have no clue whether it would have been better for me or not.
I think I understand why they didn't include it because I mean it would mean a lot more screen time for one,
Yeah,
even for the extended edition, like a lot more time, probably a solid 25 minutes extra. Um, and it kind of it's another ending. Like everyone jokes saying this film's got like the three different endings,
doesn't
which
that
is
didn't
talking
actually feel
about.
that long for me. It didn't feel long for me like at all. Everyone was saying, "Oh my god, it's a movie with like an ending that just never stops." It didn't really feel like it. Just felt like a normal ending. In fact, kind of felt quite fast paced for me.
I'd say it doesn't feel long for me, but it does feel like it's three different endings, one after the other, even if they're quite short.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, but they have to do. I mean, like they're three different threads and stuff. To be honest,
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's not a criticism. It's just some people, uh,
yeah. I
yeah.
think I think the movie. I think the trilogy earns a damn long ending, anyways. To be honest.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. You can't really end it there and then after.
Yeah, you can't like end like imagine if they ended like a 9 movie saga with like after the big battle, like everyone just hugs. That would be ridiculous. Oh, imagine if a movie did that.
I can't imagine.
Anyways, yeah. Anyways, any more differences, and then we can move on to well, we've kind of done extended versus theatrical, so we can just kind of talk about themes and characters and stuff, and go into acting.
Um, there are sort of two more differences. The first one's pretty brief. That's Aragorn. In the books, he doesn't have that sort of doubt about wanting to become king that he does in the films. That's sort of not there, and that's another example of sort of added
So
drama.
why isn't he king in the books?
Oh, he's still not king, but I mean he fully wants to be king. Whereas
He wants to be king.
in the films, he's got that sort of
He's kind of humble, yeah. I kind
well,
of prefer that he's humble because like every man is kind of in these story in like in the Middle Earth stories like they're all like seduced by power and stuff. And Aragorn's like I don't want to be king.
he's still humble, but he's also like kind of secure in his desire to become king. Like, he doesn't doubt himself.
I see. I think it's because Aragon doesn't want to associate himself with Gondor because of how far it's fallen and its failures, especially with Isildur and stuff like that. So I
Yeah,
think that's what I got it as. Yeah.
yeah, that's where
What,
you're
what's
getting
your
it
other
from.
difference? What? Sorry, what was your other difference?
Eowyn. Um,
Aelwyn. All right, yeah. No, Aelwyn. That was crazy. I knew that I am no man. I've seen that in memes, but seeing that in a movie which came out, one sec, 2002, right? No,
um,
2003. God,
2003,
I'm
I
as
think.
old as Lord of the Rings. I'm yeah. That moment in 2003, like firstly, I don't really get like maybe the prophecy just had a loophole in terms of man meaning only men, but that was such a kind of a not in your face, but like a good kind of girl power moment, or not like kind of feminist moment, and like that was sick. And I'm like, that happened in 2003, and there was no internet then. But imagine if there was an internet in 2003 and everyone's watching this movie with this moment. People would have gotten so pissed. And but it was a pretty cool moment. I'm gonna be honest. And she was a very interesting character. I just didn't know what to think of her. You kind of see her as this sort of this woman who's kind of crying about her dad being kind of messed up and everything, and
Uncle.
her brother being killed. Sorry, her uncle. Yeah, sorry. And then she starts kind of like flirting with Aragon and stuff, and you're like, oh my god, she's like likes him, but he's obviously got something going with a bloody elf, so she's just kind of a bit hopeless. And then suddenly, like, she's like kills the Witch King, and you're like, okay, she's interesting. She's a good character. But anyways, it's on to your difference.
Oh yeah, so she's basically she's that and more in the book.
Right.
For one, it's not revealed that the person who kills the Witch King is Eowyn until like right after it happens or as it happens. I can't remember, but like in the films, you know it's Eowyn, so there's no real big surprise. Or the book handles that surprise slightly better, and she's also just basically a stronger character in the book, which is mainly a result of having more time to develop her. I think,
Yeah.
which I mean they've done a good job in the film, but um, basically everyone's just a bit more oversimplified, which is unavoidable.
Yeah. I mean, in the extended cuts, I think she does have a lot more to do. But
Yeah,
I mean, as I mean, she's such a tiny character. When you break it down, there are so many characters. She's tiny, but she still gets her time. And it's quite effective the way to do it.
but yeah, those are. I think there are a lot more differences, but these are the significant ones that I either liked or disliked that I wanted to discuss.
Right. Okay. So the next topic is like story themes and characters. And I just want to start with. So there's been kind of I don't. People say that these the stories by Tolkien are an allegory of World War Two, and obviously he said no. Like I hate allegory. I just kind of want to do history and kind of he just has kind of the same influences in terms of the Bible. And I've read his interpretation. I've read his translation of Beowulf, and it's very Lord of the Ringsy, and lots of biblical stuff in there. Lots of kind of stuff about nature and temptation of man, all that stuff. Um, but I think the reason why it is so resonant is that yeah, sure, it's got magic and elves and wizards and stuff, but as we've touched upon before, like it's about the temptation of man. It's about the power of friendship. It's about nature prevailing over kind of bad industrialization and things like that, which is quite relevant nowadays with the whole kind of climate change, green sort of stuff going on. It's about lots of different things. It's about not underestimating the little guy. I mean, it's immense thematically in terms of story, which is why the stories just work so damn well.
Mm. Yeah, I think. I mean, looking at the allegory side of things, um, I think any allegory is incidental, um, and I think that translates over well into the film because it's just sort of there in the background, but not really discussed fully, which is where it works best.
Yeah, it's World War I, or it was about World War I. If I said World
Yeah,
War Two, I meant World War I. World War I, for example, you kind of had like what's it like Flanders Fields, all those fields, beautiful nature, roses, all that stuff, and they got absolutely kind of destroyed by tanks and warfare and gunfire and artillery and all that stuff, and that is a theme of kind of man versus nature in a way, you know, just like English literature, poetry, GCSE. But yeah, it's man versus nature, and you see those in the books and in movies, but it's not. We're doing man versus nature because World War I had that conflict. It's like we're doing man versus nature, and World War I also had that conflict. And we know Tolkien was in that conflict, was in World War I, and he saw this stuff. So he wasn't necessarily trying to reference World War I. He was trying to reference the themes that also occurred in his experience that he became aware of because of being a soldier.
yeah, exactly. I think if you want an example of where this stands out, the scene in the Dead Marshes, I think, um,
Oh
does a good job
yes,
of
yes,
highlighting this. That's where I feel it the strongest.
yeah. The Dead Marshes. They reminded me of 1917 when you see all those dead bodies,
Mm.
and it's like bloody hell. Yeah. So story themes and characters. Yeah, I mean, thematically it's immense, and it's not much else to talk about. There are tons of videos and analysis to talk about the themes in these stories and all that.
I think with
It's
that,
just a really good story, really.
yeah, I mean, you either sort of already know it anyway, or you have no idea what we're on about if you haven't seen it. So,
Yeah. I mean, if you haven't seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy, what are you doing? I know I haven't really seen it properly until like a month ago, but still, like, I would slap myself on the backside for not having seen it before. Yeah. Anyways, so let's on to the next topic. So when I saw the Fellowship of the Ring, I rendezvous. Well, I kind of told Sam, and I was like, "Bloody hell, that was fantastic!" And I said, "There's one thing that I didn't love, and it was Elijah Wood's acting. Kind of was a little bit off. I don't know, a bit cringe. But then watching his journey throughout the movies, it made total sense. Like a lot of the Hobbit's acting is so kind of wholesome and cheersome, and kind of like childish. And then they kind of grow, and you have contrast Frodo in the beginning of the Fellowship to like Frodo when he refuses to. He's like, the ring is mine, and they're like, this is like a different person, and Elijah Wood definitely made use of those extremes for
yeah,
sure. So actually, I take it back.
I think he's pretty much perfect. I mean, a lot of
Yes,
the
he's
actors
great.
are perfect in this, but
I
him
mean,
especially.
Ian McKellen. Oh my god, we have to talk about Ian McKellen. Um, Nerd Writer has a good YouTube channel. He has a video about Ian McKellen's acting, specifically acting with his eyes. Um, I mean, yeah, his facial expressions. He has to guide us through this movie. Essentially, he's the one who knows about everything. I like one of the best scenes I think in the whole trilogy is the scene with Frodo and Gandalf when Gandalf has just figured out that this ring that Bilbo has is like the one ring. Sorry, and he looks like terrified about it. But Ian McKellen is great, and um, he's good enough. Like he's great in the X-Men movies. Um, he is, I think, overshadowed by Michael Fassbender in the prequel X-Men movies, who's like phenomenal. But Ian McKellen in this is like and especially when he becomes Gandalf the White, he's kind of less human in some ways. But
A bit
you
more
still
digital.
like you yeah, but you can't not love the guy, and get the guy. He's just a really great character.
Fun fact, actually.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
so Christopher Lee actually was promised the role of Gandalf by Tolkien
Oh
because they were good friends. Tolkien
yeah.
and Christopher Lee actually met up a few times.
Didn't they fight together in the war or something? No,
Um,
they were like they had some sort of connection in the military or something. I think Christopher Lee also was in the military or something.
I don't know how they met, but yeah, they were good friends. I know that. Christopher Lee is just a really interesting person, just in general.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard a lot about him, but yeah, him being I can't imagine him as Gandalf. I,
But that's only because he's played Saruman. Like,
yeah, and Count Dooku as well, who's a very Saruman-esque character. I can't imagine him as a good guy, but probably could have pulled it off pretty well. But
I think he
Ian
enjoyed.
McKellen, yeah, but Ian McKellen as Gandalf, like, I don't know if you can get better casting than that. Didn't he also play Dumbledore?
No,
I don't know the Harry Potter movies that well, but didn't he also play Dumbledore?
no, there was Michael
Uh,
Gambon, I think, played
in the
him.
first two movies or something. One sec.
No, it was someone else who he
Michael
never played.
Gambon. All right,
Yeah,
they kind of look similar. I'm stupid. I don't know the Harry Potter movies like at all. Really, I've seen A Prisoner of Azkaban. That's because it's directed by Alfonso Cuarón, and I love him. But that's it, really. Yeah. In terms of other actors, the guy who plays Sam was in the Goonies, and he now voices Shazam in the
Sean
DC
Astin.
animated movies.
Yeah, Sean
Yeah,
Astin. He did a good job actually. You kind of.
yeah, he did a great job, I think.
It's weird. He's American.
Yeah,
I think his accent. Some of the accents sound a bit off in places.
yeah, but it is a fantasy world, so I can forgive that. To be honest.
Yeah, it's like it's very subtle, but I think and it's only like one or two lines across the three, but it does happen sometimes.
Yeah. Um, had enough to talk about characters.
I can't really think of anything else.
All right. So next topic is cinematography and directing, which is kind of my forte, even though I've never really directed anything. But I study
Wow.
directing and stuff. Well, let's not talk about that. So one thing I talked about Nerdwriter. He's a great YouTube channel. He did a supercut of kind of some great shots with items, props, uh, and the gravity of objects, and particularly with the ring. The camera finds itself zooming in, like not moving towards, but zooming in on the ring, like a lot with a lot of the shots, and it really just draws you in. And like, not many good filmmakers can make you feel so much presence in one golden ring, despite knowing all the stuff surrounding it. But again, the directing is, I mean, Peter Jackson is great. Even in The Hobbit, he's great. Um, his action directing is also fantastic as well. I'll talk about that with Helm's Deep. But yeah, he just frames his things around. He frames the shots around the ring and things like Narsil and like there's a shot with Theoden when he unsheaths his sword, which like
Harrowing.
follows it. Yeah, and Palantir when who is it? Pippin,
Living, yeah.
like yeah, gazes into it and he has like that fit and stuff. Full of a tuck. Yeah, and the camera just really just admirably gives those items like power, which of course they have power. I mean,
Mm.
it's magic. Um, and then you have the directing. Battle of Helm's Deep, or what is it called again? What's the actual place
Yeah,
the
it's
fort called?
Helm's Deep. Well, the actual fort is called the Hornburg, but Helm's Deep
Hornburg.
is.
That's it. Yes. So I mean, the Battle of Helm. I do prefer Battle of Pelennor Fields. Um, but I mean, Battle of Helm's Deep is just a case study. I've seen it hit like used so much in terms of case study of how to do a great battle. It's got its back and forth. It's kind of good moments with Gimli and Legolas. 22, 23, 24. And it's dark moments of like who's the elf guy, the leader of the elves.
Oh,
He gets killed.
Haldir, I think. He's not in.
Haldir,
He's not in
I
the
think
books.
so. Yes. And it's just a great battle scene. Even though it's dark, though, they made sure to light it so that you can actually see what's going on in this action. which is like, whew, it's crazy seeing that. But yeah, and they're so clear with the geography, and they set up the geography of Helm's Deep. With Paddington Fields, it's different. It's a city and the fields surrounding it, and there's a river. That's all you really need to know. But Helm's Deep, it's just it's just good. I can't.
I
There's no particular way in which is great. It's just a really effective, battle scene.
and I think they had like three differently scaled
Yes,
models, didn't
yes.
they?
So they had a small model. They had a bigature, which is like as tall as like 2-3 men, I think. Then they have a medium scale one and a very small scale one. And I think for the shots where they blow up the wall, they had one chance to do that, and I think I like that because it looks like a very rugged explosion because they only had one chance, and it kind of just looks very chaotic and not perfect. We'll talk about CGI in a bit, but there's a contrastingly perfect explosion, which I just love. Um, but yeah, and in terms of directing, the action directing, so in The Hobbit, the action directing gets a bit kind of wild and ridiculous, but I like it. The barrel sequence. There's a bit in the third movie where one of the characters gets like a wagon or something and just rides down it. They scaled that back for the Lord of the Rings movies. The kind of the most kind of ridiculous thing is when Legolas slides down the stairs, with the Fellowship theme playing
Mm.
full blast. But yeah, I didn't. We'll talk about the CG in the battles as well, but Peter Jackson is just really good with directing action. And the last thing I want to talk about is the cinematography. It's just really good. This, as I've talked about with the zooming in on the ring and stuff. It was it has a glow, doesn't it? These movies,
Yeah, I think you're right.
like you see the highlights of like the light in these movies, and they glow, they literally glow, and that's because they shot it on film. Um, can't remember what stock but they shot it on film with like state of the art Arri cameras, and they really dug into that kind of element, for these for the cinematography. So it looks very just ethereal in a way.
And another thing is, I think this is going back to what you said about imbuing objects with character as well. I think they had like a massive replica of the ring, basically, which they used for a lot of shots. Um,
Really?
yeah, so like for when it's on the floor, I could be wrong, but I think they've
Oh yes.
had like a really big one.
And by the way, there's in the first movie, there's a shot. There's a bit where Bilbo drops the ring, and there's a massive clang. And the way they do that, the way to get that clang, and so the ring wouldn't bounce, because they didn't want the ring to bounce. They wanted to really give it this gravity in that shot. They use like a magnetic floor.
Oh,
Um, I mean, just ingenious, right? Um, any more you want to talk about? Because we can segue into CGI now.
mm, well, I guess I mean it ties into the CGI a bit. I guess if you wanted to
Yeah,
talk about the scale, how they did the sort of different.
yeah. The CGI. There's so much to talk about. We can talk. Okay, so let's talk about battles first. So they invented a software for this called Massive. So essentially, it's a video game engine, which they had those then, but they made it very advanced, and it's more advanced than engines you have in most games now because they had time to render it. Well, games now have to render things in real time, and they used motion capture to just record a bunch of different blocks, attacks, runs, etc. Then they made their models of the different, orcs and elves and stuff, and they kind of added little variations and parameters. So all of the orcs are just slightly unique, and they can add parameters to just slightly change the kind of the movements, and they essentially put that in the engine, and it just randomizes it. But even cooler than that, it's not just them doing that, but they interact with each other, and they use AI. like self-driving car AI, obviously less advanced, but that sort of idea. And it's like for 2000, 2001, 2002, like that is insane, right?
Mm.
That's crazy. And it allows you to get those amazing, just swooping overhead shots of like the whole battlefield. It's amazing. Yeah. And then, right, what's the next thing? Okay, let's talk about Gollum.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything you want to talk about Gollum, just the character, before I talk about his CG?
Um. Well, he's basically not changed much from the books. Um. I think Andy Serkis does a fantastic job with him.
Yep. Um, Andy Serkis, yeah, I mean he has also done he motion captured a lot of things. He his best performance in my opinion, apart from Gollum, is Caesar in the fantastic Planet of the Apes prequel trilogy, the great prequel trilogy. If there ever was a good prequel trilogy, it's this prequel trilogy. It's like really good. But anyways, I digress. Um, so the way they did it, so you see Gollum in the first movie, like a close up, and it's dark, he's in shadow, and it's a very more it's a more kind of more exaggerated features than the version we then see in the next movies. Um, the reason why is because originally they were going to get Andy Serkis to voice Gollum, and they were then just going to animate Gollum naturally and just get some other bugger to do the motion capture and all that stuff. Then they saw Andy Serkis like method voice acting Gollum, and they're like, why don't we just get this guy to motion capture Gollum? And this is what launched his career, as kind of the most esteemed motion capture kind of actor. And so they just got into motion capture. But the thing is, so motion capture in Avatar, for example, which is they came out 2009. So a bit later, they had a fully CG environment, fully CG characters. They just got the actors to motion capture on just the stage, and so everything just was done in one go. A lot of motion capture nowadays is done with plates and stuff, which I won't get too much into, but they just do it once. Not for this. Andy Serkis had to do a performance in a grey onesie with the other characters on set, and then he had to basically do the same performance as close as possible in a motion capture suit on on a kind of a sound stage, because motion capture wasn't as easy. You couldn't just take the motion capture suit anywhere. You had to properly do it in a proper motion capture stage. So yeah, and even then, the motion capture information is sketchy. So the animators had to actually hand kind of fix sort of the animations, and so I mean, Gollum's motion capture is phenomenal. There are some shots like when he's in the water flapping about, and you're like, how the hell did they get water to flap about a real world character? And it's because they actually had Andy Serkis there in the first place. The thing is that if you actually watch that shot properly, you can just see like lots of just random water splashes, and that's because Andy Serkis was splashing that bit, but the second performance didn't. Um, but I mean, he is so just good, and so is the CG model for 2001, 2002. It's like phenomenally good. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the
Um,
CGI just holds up really well.
yeah. Right. Here's the interesting CG, which I just digital acting and digital workflows and compositing and AI, that stuff's impressive. But the in-camera CG they did, particularly with the Hobbits, there are a bunch of different ways they had the size difference. One was essentially using kind of dwarves and giant people, which is why a lot of the time you don't actually see their faces. You only see one person's face. So, for example, a shot of Gandalf and Frodo's facing away from the camera, hugging him. That's just a short person doing it. Um, they just do lots of stuff like that. But what happens when you need a shot with Gandalf and Bilbo or Frodo in the same thing? The one thing that they do, either they did use green screen, and they've usually had Gandalf on a replica set that's bigger. And for when the camera is moving, they have to scale that movement. So they have to use motion control, which is actually not motion control is just when you control the movement of the camera, and you can scale it up, but you have to count. You have to use maths. Like hell no. Um, and so they did that, and then they also had forced perspective, which is I don't know how they did it so perfectly, but I don't know if they used maths or just guesswork or some sort of technique to see how it look in real, like forced perspective of like a big version of a table and a small version of a table and all that stuff. It's just crazy.
Probably a
So
lot
yeah,
of trial and error.
yeah. And the final bit of CG that I can remember that I want to talk about. So I mentioned an explosion. That's perfect. And can you guess what that explosion is?
Well, yeah, it's the final death of Sauron, right?
Yes, the explosion of Barad-dûr, and it like goes off boom like to the left, and it's like very satisfying. Um, the way they did it is they were all off on Christmas break, and they were like, "Oh my god, I no one can be asked to model that in CG because it was a model. No one can be asked to do that in CG." And one guy just over Christmas break was like, "Screw Christmas." He just did it himself. He did a whole model himself. When they all when they all came back from Christmas break, it was like, "Ta-da! Here's the model. You can now blow it up to your heart's desires to get the perfect shot." And it's like, huh? Thanks. Oh,
Hello, yeah.
yeah. Sorry, I lost you there for a second.
Sorry.
Um, CG. In terms of CG, not much else really to talk about.
No.
No. So next topic. I've been listening to the score a lot recently. Let me just tell you that a lot. I love it so much, and of course that is Howard Shore's incredible score. So you probably know quite a lot about this. I think you've talked some about it. So some like stuff about it. So have you got any insight on it? 'Cause it's
Well,
quite good.
I'll say it's probably my favorite film score, except maybe the original Blade Runner.
Yeah.
I think he's just it. I mean, it must be tough to score three movies of this length.
Yes, especially when you see the extended cuts. There is so much music to conduct.
Yeah, and I mean, he's done just a perfect job of it, really.
He really did. From the kind of the nice sweet Shire theme to like they used the choir, and I think the choir he wrote it in Elvish, and I think it's very much Tolkien Silmarillion-esque because a lot of Middle Earth, especially in terms of the creation story, is about music.
Mm.
Every Iluvatar's kind of music and stuff, and I mean the choir in this is it's beautiful, really, in the movies. But they balance that. So, for example, Rohan's theme is very Anglo-Saxon stuff, very Anglo-Saxon esque, and you really get that feeling of kind of the men, that sort of the men species.
Mm.
And I'm not a music expert. I didn't even do music GCSE, but I do read a lot about film scores, and he uses leitmotifs, which, if you don't know, are kind of like a motif. So the Shire leitmotif is, for example, it's like it's a motif, it's a theme, and then you could develop that and you change it and stuff. And I've kind of read a lot about how he uses these themes and combines them, develops them to tell the story with the story. So with the plot of the movie. So for example, Rohan, when they arrive at Pelennor Fields, he does something interesting, and he plays the Gondor theme when Rohan is prepared, when Theoden is preparing to charge, and then when they charge, he finally plays the Rohan theme, and it kind of presents a sort of a unity between them. and when the beacons are being lit, which I love that scene, by the way.
Oh yeah, that scene
Just
is good.
pure, just visual, like no characters, just visual goodness. With New Zealand, we didn't really talk about the setting, but New Zealand,
No, we could do
they
it.
really let it shine. They really let the location shine. But yeah, and it's just pure visual goodness. But then Howard Shore just tops it. The cherry on top and the icing and the crap ton of sugar as well. It's the score, and he plays the Gondor theme more powerful than it's ever done before, as Gondor is kind of expanding and finally reaching out to Rohan, and it's like, God, it's awe inspiring, to be honest.
Yeah, that particular scene, they charge at the Pelennor Fields. I think the music in that really does make it more than any other movement in the films. And I
Yeah, I mean,
think the films would be great even without the score, but I don't think they'd be on this
oh
level.
yes. I mean, you can watch tons of great films without the score, and it's really awkward. It's really weird how great movies are awkward without a score. But yeah, um, and another bit of the score I want to talk about is the Fellowship theme. I there's that iconic the ring goes south moment where they all walk past the rock and the
Yeah,
Fellowship theme is playing at full blast, and they really use that theme not to just show the Fellowship, but to show Fellowship in general, and it's a really nice kind of expansion and development of that theme. And just I don't know how he made I don't know how he came up with these themes, but they just work so well. It's just I don't get it. I don't understand how
it's,
it's
it's
just so
just
good.
it's the sort of thing you can't really even talk about without experiencing it, I guess.
Yeah.
It's like,
I mean,
well, you can say that about
neither of
anything.
us are neither of us are music students. Um, neither of us. I don't really study film scores that much. I know about leitmotifs and I listen out for it, but I'm sure people could offer an explanation to how we did it. But I think we can just appreciate how damn good it is.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, I'm definitely okay with just listening to it a lot. Yeah. Here's the next bit comparing to the Hobbit trilogy. So my experience with the Hobbit trilogy, I saw a few of them in the cinemas. I really liked them. Never really stuck with me or anything, but I mean, I really like them. I won't say they're awful, but they're definitely not as good as
I
the Lord
will.
of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah, I think
Sorry,
I will say they're awful. Um,
fair enough. I mean, you probably know more about those movies than I do. I saw them once, and that's it.
no, I think I've seen the first two a couple of times, and the third one only once. Because the third one's just not worth watching. I can't really think of anything about it that was any good. The first two are,
You get to see Legolas defy gravity,
oh yeah,
right?
that seems funny.
Bloody hell!
To be fair, he does that on the Lord of the Rings as well. That's not really a fault of.
Yeah, but not on that scale.
Yeah,
Not that ridiculous. Like he slides down the elephant and it looks a bit dodgy, but I'll forgive that. That's cool.
he's an elf. They can do magic, um, I guess. But yeah, the first two Hobbit films are not the worst. Um, they're worth watching once. The second one kind of, well, I mean, this is the reason that they falter as a trilogy, really. But the second one, about halfway through, it really begins to get worse. But before that, they're all right. And the reason they falter is that they're just way too long.
Exactly. I mean, how long are they? I think they're 3 hours long. Like not 3.5. I think they're 3 hours long, and it's
Yeah,
like
about 3 hours, I think.
you could maybe. I mean, the Hobbit trilogy is what 300 books, 300 words, and it's like you could maybe get away with writing or
I think
with
300
doing.
words.
Yeah, and like you could get away with doing 3 short films, and I think the studio wanted 3 films because money, but we can get if they did 3 short films, it could have worked out wonderfully. And in fact, Peter Jackson originally wasn't going to do them. I think it was Guillermo del Toro who did Shape of Water and Pan's Labyrinth who was originally going to do them, and that would have been great, to be honest. Um, but he essentially set out his idea was 2 movies, and there would have been something else because the first movie I think is from Bilbo's perspective, and the second movie are the same events from like Thorin's perspective or something like that. They're
That's
from two different
interesting.
perspectives, and I was like, that would have justified doing multiple movies. But
I think
yeah,
two movies would be good, but they'd have to be.
yeah,
I think 2.5 hour movies would make sense.
yeah, that would have been totally justified, and they wouldn't have been so bloated with all these subplots. And you have like it's weird because they talk about all the Dol Guldur and all that kind of setting up Lord of the Rings, and it's like it's not exactly like they're doing like a Justice League where it's just incessantly setting up future movies. They're setting up past movies, and I think they want us to go like, oh look, this is how it all leads into each other, you know. But it's like I'm fine with that. Honestly, I'm fine with that. But the movie, you have like this other character who you see in from Lake Town. I can't remember. He was really
Bard.
annoying though. Huh?
Bard. I mean, he was just boring, wasn't he?
No, there
Um,
was one who like was just a dickhead.
Worm.
Not the one he killed. Not the one who killed Smaug. He was cool. Just just this other guy. And it's like he had his own subplot, and they gave this romantic subplot as well. And it's like,
They're just dumb.
right. And so Chris Hartwell was this editor, like professional editor, um, and he is essentially doing. Plenty of people have done it before, but he's doing a very good job. He's actually done it, but he's doing a series on his thought process, and he's done a re-edit of the trilogy, shortening them down to like 1 hour 50 minutes each ish, really cutting it down. And he, for example, with that romance, he didn't cut it all out. He just cut some bits out and made it like so much more effective, apparently. So I think his point was that you can't use editing to fix every movie. Like you can't fix the prequels with editing. You
No.
just cannot. But with these movies, I think it's just there's gold in them. I mean, firstly, they're based off a really good book. There's gold, but unlike the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is super, the extended cuts, like what is it?
Jay, there's gold,
Yeah,
but it's guarded by a dragon.
the dragon being studios
Yeah.
wanting massive long movies for 300 words. Yeah, 300 pages. But yeah, I mean, the Lord of the Ring trilogy, what is it? 11 hours? No,
9 hours
like,
ish if it's not extended.
no, like, so 3 times 4.5. Oh my god. What is that? 13.5. 13 and a half hours of film is still super focused on the story. 13 and a half hours of film. Based off of what 1,200 words. Yeah, I think so.
Thereabouts.
Yeah. And then the Hobbit trilogy is.
Words.
Hmm?
You said
I meant pages. Sorry, pages.
you keep
God,
doing
I
that.
keep mixing up. Yeah, and they have the Hobbit trilogy, which is what 7.5 hours of film. 7.5 hours of film
Yeah.
based off 300 pages. That's ridiculous. And I mean, like, the Battle of the Five Armies could have taken up most of the film. I do think that, and there is one reason why I think they could have pulled it off, and that reason is Mad Max Fury Road, which is like one long chase scene. And I think Peter Jackson could have pulled it off because he's great at action, but they just didn't pull it off for whatever reasons. They didn't pull it off. Um, so yeah, just not as good.
Yeah.
In conclusion,
Waste.
so go
Waste.
ahead. Sorry.
Like there was potential, especially because there are things about the trilogy that are good, but
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say wasted potential. I would say squandered potential, because as I said, you can watch these movies and there's some great stuff. It's just squandered by other things. It's not waste necessarily. It's just um, yeah, it's squandered basically, stomped on by other stuff.
yeah, yeah, overshadowed by the negative aspects of it.
Yeah. So anything more you want to talk about? Oh yeah. So negatives. So bad CGI. I did mention yes. So there is one really dodgy shot of CG in these movies, and there's actually tons of more good stuff I want to talk about. But there's one dodgy shot, and it's with Sam and he runs into Mount Doom, like the doorway, and it's like a wide shot, it's a far away shot, and he like slides across the ground. Because they had to make him slide across the ground because they didn't get enough footage of him running far enough, or whatever. But it's like really dodgy. Yeah. Anyways, so I've talked about Peter Jackson's action, and he winged that. So for I think the barrel sequence in The Hobbit, he winged, and I think it was a pretty cool sequence. That whole kind of semi-iconic stairway sequence in Fellowship. Yeah, in the script, it's just the Fellowship run down the stairs, and they made it into this massive action beat. And it works, like works well. It's really good.
I like the arrow physics. I don't know. No one really talks about that because it's a really small thing, but the way the arrows uh, sort of arc in these films, it's like really
What
sick.
the CG?
Yeah, like when they're getting shot
Oh
at,
yeah,
like the arrows are just really realistic.
I'm guessing they had a they probably had a physics simulation for some arrows, and then they turned it into a particle system. So they modeled some arrows, like I'm guessing like 100 arrows when there should be like 10,000, and then they just created a particle off of those arrows to give the illusion of tons of arrows. So yeah, they really had to do lots of incredible kind of creative stuff. And okay, so for the Balrog, the smoke and fire effects, look like whoa, they're good, like they're damn good. And it's like they didn't have the capacity or the software then to simulate fire and smoke. Nowadays, I could do it on my computer, but they that just didn't exist back then. So they had to take their own element footage of smoke and fire, and they had to essentially like use a particle effect on the Balrog creature, and somehow make it work. And it looks like they fooled me, and I thought that they somehow did particle simulations, but I was like, they didn't exist back then. Um, just really good stuff. And another thing I want to say is just the orcs and their prosthetics, like, is really good.
They're just
Um,
well acted as well. I think makes them work.
yeah, they have these really weird northern accents, and occasionally it took me out of it, but
No, I
I
think
don't know why.
I really enjoy.
It did. I think looking back, it added to it. It just portrays them as these sort of just scummy people. Um, and like when the Uruk-hai are breaking out of their kind of the bubbles or whatever they are, like they did all that, and it's yeah. And talking about Isengard, oh my god, I can't believe I didn't think of this earlier. In the first movie,
I know what you're going to say.
there is a why, yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
There's like a one, well, it's a seemingly one take shot of the camera goes and shows Isengard goes towards the tower that just suddenly drops into the caves, and it just goes through Isengard. It's like bloody hell, like literally made my jaw drop. And it's like, how did he do that? How did he get such a massive film camera and put it in that model? Because they used a model, they didn't use the CGI caves. They used a model for that. Like they modeled the inside of the caves. They used a periscope. They just put a periscope in front of the camera, and they I think they stitched together 3 different shots for practicality. And then they added so they do a lot of sort of model stuff, and what they do is to bring it to life. They add things like tree elements, CG, or not CG, like green screen elements, like people and leaves flying around and birds flying around. It's like it looks like a real place. Rivendell looks so real, and it's because of just their ingenuity in the models.
yeah. The locations I think really do the
Yes,
movie.
and Peter Jackson is from New Zealand, and it was such a good choice filming it in New Zealand because it's a beautiful landscape, and it supports the theme for starters, of nature is all beautiful and that stuff. Um, but it's so aesthetically pleasing, just shots of the Fellowship or Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn in the second movie, just them running. but it's just like a really wide angle helicopter shot of them running, and you see like the mountains in the background. You're like, "Phew," just takes your breath away. No,
Oh, what?
I lost you again.
Sorry. You can edit that.
That's true. Is there any more for us to talk about, or should we get to conclusions?
Uh,
Because
I don't really think of anything else.
yeah, I'm probably gonna kick myself after this podcast. Go, oh, should have talked about that. Yes. So anyway, let's just go back to the premise of this podcast. Is Lord of the Rings the best film trilogy?
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to sound pretentious about it, but yeah.
I mean, because we said Star Wars original trilogy. I mean, I think Empire is great. I think A New Hope is really good, although I wouldn't say it's great, particularly in execution. Empire is great, obviously. Obviously, Return of the Jedi has got a phenomenal third act. I'd say that, but the first half is not great in my opinion. Um, but yeah, I mean, they're not super consistent in terms of characters. I mean, the obvious one is Leia kisses Luke. Next movie, they're related. Oh my god, whoops.
Yeah,
Um,
a bit.
Obviously, Lord of the Rings trilogy is they're written together. The books and the movies were, and they're consistent into. I mean, they're kind of like the most consistent film trilogy
Yeah.
that I've seen. I mean, even the film trilogies that get better, this one doesn't really get better. It just stays great. You know, can't really think of any other trilogies to be honest that could rival it. Back to the Future trilogy, possibly. Well, I wouldn't say they're phenomenal. They're just great.
The Maze Runner trilogy, I'd say.
Oh jeez, I've read the Maze Runner trilogy actually.
I haven't seen it. I'm joking.
I think you have the Dark Knight trilogy, although Dark Knight Rises is considered Nolan's weakest film, which is telling because he's such a great filmmaker that The Dark Knight Rises is a pretty damn good film and it's still considered like a disappointment. But yeah, I mean the first two are great. The Joe Cowley trilogy, the Joe Cowley quadrilogy. No, um, I really can't think of any other trilogies that could really rival it. I mean,
I'd say
I would have said, sorry.
no. You go ahead.
I would have said the sequel trilogy if Duel of the Fates had been made, which is a teaser to a possible can't believe I'm doing it, set up for our cinematic universe. Maybe we might do a Duel of the Fates read through. That's gonna be fun. Yeah, what are you gonna say, Sam?
Yeah, I would say the National Treasure films, but unfortunately, there's only two of them.
Yeah. Maybe we could have said Zack Snyder's planned Justice League trilogy. That would have been a true cinema. Venom trilogy. Some people might say the Spider-Man trilogy. I do not think Spider-Man 3 is bad, like at all.
That's my favorite.
I think,
of
of course, it's got that scene. Yeah, it's got that scene which I love. Anyone who says Spider-Man 3 is bad, film is objective, but they're wrong. I mean, first two Spider-Man films are pretty damn good. The second one, I'd say, is great, arguably. The third one has lots of issues,
But that's what makes
but
it so good.
you
Like
can't say it's bad.
I
just don't get it.
there are a lot of bad things in it, but I think that the schlock. That's what's best about it.
The campiness of those movies
Exactly.
is beautiful. I love it so much.
That's what makes them good.
Yeah, like I'd say my favorite trilogy isn't the Avengers because it's not a trilogy. My favorite trilogy has to be the Cap trilogy. I mean, the first Avenger I think is an overlooked movie of that series. Civil War and Winter Soldier I've seen by many as great movies. That's probably my favorite, and there's a really nice progression thematically in them. Are they great? Are they great in terms of Lord of the Rings level? Great? Maybe not.
No.
Maybe not. What else? The Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Rogue Nation and Fallout Trilogy. I mean, they're bloody amazing. I love them, but I wouldn't say they're in terms of story that great. Um, what else? What else?
Maybe the
We're really pushing it.
films, but you have to exclude like the first few to make it a trilogy.
Sorry,
The Transformers films. To make it a trilogy, you have to like
they all suck.
the first few.
Well, the first one is all right. The third one I don't mind. 2 I actually used to watch a lot. 4, 5, and 6 I hate. Like I really hate. Wait, there isn't a 6th one. 4 and 5. Age of Extinction and Last Night. I hate them. I hate them so much. You watch the Last Night, and you can tell Michael Bay couldn't be bothered because in the Last Night, if you watch it in the IMAX aspect ratio, he shot it with 3 different cameras. One that was like 1.85 to 1 or something. One that was like true IMAX. One that was in the middle, and he cut between them, of course, like every filmmaker does. But the IMAX the aspect ratio, sorry, changes every single shot.
Did you watch it in
So
IMAX?
no, but I didn't see that. I saw all of them. Oh, I didn't see all of them in cinema. I saw 3 and 4 in cinemas. I didn't see 5 in cinemas. I was like, no, thank you very much. No. What other trilogies are there?
Maybe Attack of the Clones if you watched it 3 times in a row.
Revenge of the Sith just for the memes. There's a guy I watch it like 4 times in a row on Twitter. Don't know why, but he did it. He got like 100 followers or something. It's like, okay.
Well, that's one way.
I have over half as many followers I do on Twitter as I do on Instagram, which is nuts. I have like 500 followers on Twitter. I don't understand why. What else? What other trilogies are there that could rival Lord of the Rings? We need to think.
Indiana Jones.
I'm not so well versed in those movies. I only really know about Raiders.
Well, you have to not include Crystal Skull, obviously.
Yeah, that one was dodgy.
But
Yes,
also,
possibly.
John Rhys Davies, who plays Gimli, played Salah in those movies, so that's a bit of a link.
Yeah. You know what? We're stumped, and we know a lot of films, so I think that may go to subjectively. That's a key word, which I think people miss out in the film discussion scene. Lord of the Rings, is it the best trilogy, Sam?
Yeah. Yeah, that's my ruling.
In the words of Keanu Reeves' John Wick, the last line of John Wick Chapter 3, which is great. Yeah. He says it like that. He's like, not like a, yeah, let's do it like he's like a, yeah, I'm pissed off. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pissed off at how good these movies are. Anything else you want to say?
Read the books.
Read the books. Watch the films. I've regret a lot of things in my life, and one of them is not watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy when I was like when I could have, even though I've always had the theatrical box set, like always, but I've just never seen it until I took the initiative to finally see it. So, read the books, as Sam says. At least read The Hobbit, Silmarillion if you really feel brave. But just watch the movies, man. Just watch the movies.
Yeah, pretty much.